Hello, if you've been here before, welcome back. If you've seen this video series before or want to head straight to the video content, go to the timecode below. If it's your first time here, hi, my name is David. I make videos talking about media that I want to talk about. This is the next entry into my Fear Entity Exploration video series where I analyze the dread powers within the Magnus Archives, which is a horror podcast created by Johnny Sims and Alexander J. Newell for the Rusty Quill production company. I will be analyzing 3 episodes that focus on a specific entity, and using those episodes, its contents, and their connections to the grander story to explore the entity and how it's used within the show. I have chosen these episodes based on my rankings of every season of the Magnus Archives, and I have a playlist with those ranking videos if you so desire to be familiar with my opinions. This is a heavy spoiler warning for the entirety of the Magnus Archives, as I will be discussing these episodes with the full knowledge of all 200 episodes. You have been warned. Enjoy.
What about meat? How does that work?
The flesh.
And when something formed out of an animalistic fear of the slaughterhouse reaches out to people...
Things get weird, yeah. It gets all mixed up with human neuroses, bodies, gore, that nagging worry that deep down we're all just electrified meat squeezing air at each other.
The fear of being meat. That your body is just food, that your body is malleable, that your body will be changed. The fear that your muscles will spasm without you, that your sinew will be plucked by someone else's fingers, that your bones will be licked clean. Cannibalism, body horror, dysmorphia, and metamorphosis. Your body is your own, indelibly and certainly, for the rest of your life. But when it's not, that's where the horror comes. It speaks to the vulnerability we perceive in our own bodies, knowing that this is the only body we will ever have, and it's precious to us. We are not meant to see our insides, because if we do, something has gone very wrong. There's also something disgusting and taboo about flesh, whether yours or someone else's, going back to the idea that the body is an incredibly vulnerable and intimate thing. But sometimes it might be eaten by another human, perhaps for survival or for pleasure. Sometimes it might break by external forces or internal. Sometimes it might change by age and growth or by eldritch forces. And with all of these, there is a loss of control. And that innate feeling, not wanting to lose control of our own bodies, is what drives this fear. Puberty and hormones begets the usual changes we see in our bodies, and those changes are common fears and insecurities within people. You can't control these changes, and seeing your body change without wanting to is horrifying. On the other side of the spectrum, we are constantly focused on meat. Beef, poultry, and fish are large industries that constantly churn out food for us. So much death to be able to feed us. The flesh is so evocative. A lot of the manifestations within the Magnus Archives focuses on the meat aspect, muscles and bones the focus of the horror. It's disgusting and frequent, I have to say. It's also loud, imposing, memorable, and disgusting. Shifting the identity of food from animals to humans can cause a lot of different terrors to sprout up. While the flesh isn't represented with any of the main characters in the show, and its plot relevance is pretty quick, it still makes sure to leave its mark, pun intended. A lot of memorable episodes and manifestations come from the flesh. The bone turner, the flesh pig, the guy who just pins meat to the walls. It's a very active entity within the show with a myriad of appearances. Per my count, there are 15 episodes with statements or events that solely feature elements, aspects, or avatars of the flesh, not counting overlapping episodes. I've stated this before, the flesh is tied in second place for the entity with the most individual episodes, shared with the corruption, and only beat by the Stranger's 20 episodes. Go watch my Stranger's video. I feel like the flesh does so much with so little. There's not much you can do with meat. But the flesh also touches on body horror, mostly with an organic tilt, not so much focused on body horror through innate materials, but with the mutation and change of human DNA and the addition or subtraction of body parts. It's spearheaded mostly by the bone turner, Jared Hopworth, and I have an episode to talk about his incredible impact. But overall, in the grand scheme of the show, the flesh doesn't affect the plot beyond Jared. But this is not a bad thing at all, as its manifestations are varied, frequent, and very fun. One thing I will say is that it doesn't touch much on body dysmorphia, almost to a fault. I feel like because the writer Johnny Sims is a cisgender male, that the transgender aspect of the fear of one's body is not touched on as much as it should. However, I think it's best that he didn't attempt too many stories that touched on this, as this is an aspect of other people's stories that aren't his to tell. I would have liked more flesh manifestations in the Magnus archives that drew from body dysmorphia, but they do rectify that in the Magnus protocol, using body dysmorphia and trans stories, trans characters to tell this side of this fear. What I want to do is look at the 3 episodes I've chosen about the flesh and use them to explore the things I like about this dread power and the individual successes of these episodes. As I said before, I am making the series in ascending order from the entities I least like to most like, so of 15, the flesh is number 7. I will let y'all guess which are my top 3. For the flesh, the 3 episodes I've chosen are 14 Piecemeal, 130 Meat, and 131 Flesh.
He'd clearly done okay for himself in the years I'd been away and could afford some muscle to make sure I didn't bother him. I ended up with a couple of bruised ribs when I finally got tired of the runaround and tried to have it out with him properly. It was laying there, some grim side street in Lewisham of all places, that I came to the decision that if I was going to hurt this asshole, and I mean properly hurt him, I was going to have to think outside the box a bit.
Case number 0112905, statement of Lee Rentoul on the murder of his associate Paul Noriega, released April 24th, 2016. Brief summary of this episode: Lee Rentoul warns Institute to not use this statement against him, as this isn't a confession but a plea for help. He confirms that he killed Paul Noriega in revenge for being pinned for a crime that they committed together, but he hadn't planned to kill him. He was on parole and had to be on his best behavior, so he was patient with his plotting. He turned to Toby McMullen, someone crossed by Noriega as well, who told him about a mysterious killer. Rentoul is introduced to Angela, an old woman living in the suburbs who agrees to kill Noriega for him. He's told to wait for Angela to finish the job, but Noriega doesn't die and he gets impatient. Rentoul gets a tip that Noriega will be vulnerable during a trade deal with Mikhail Salesa, and he hides in a warehouse. He gets a drop on Noriega and kills him, dismembering and hiding his body. He noted that Noriega had missing body parts he would have remembered not having, but ignored it. Later, Rentoul stumbles upon a cardboard package on the ground with his name written on it, and a severed pinky finger. He threw it away, but heading home, he trips and cuts his finger off. Soon more boxes appear, and he begins to lose those body parts as well. When he confronts Angela, she can't do anything about it, and he came to the Institute to ask for help, because the most recent package held a tongue. In the final comments, John discusses the inability to find Angela and Rentoul, but Tim was able to find his old apartment empty except for a large pile of cardboard boxes. Picking episodes for The Flesh, it's gonna get harder as I keep going, but picking episodes for The Flesh specifically were equal parts difficult and easy. There are so many episodes, and some are equally evocative and fun to talk about. A handful of Flesh episodes intersect with each other, but a good portion are standalone, and they tend to be really good. I think this is the best standalone Flesh episode, and it's also one of the first ever, if we're not counting Five Thrown Away with its proto-Flesh ideas. I'm not. This episode is very important to the overall texture of the first season. Episodes 13 through 15 create a great trio that adds variety to the show. The episodes prior to this set the tones and themes that we'll move forward with, along with characters that we'll return to, also foreshadowing plot points. But the episodes prior do tend to feel pretty monotonous. These prior episodes have similar framings, styles, and deliveries. It's just John's cynical reading of these statements again and again, which is not bad. This collection of 3 episodes shakes the formula up. I briefly touched this on my prior Entity Exploration for The Lonely, go check that out. Episode 13 alone changes the framing with a new statement reader. It's not just John reading it, now it's Naomi Hearn. I'll touch on it when we get to the buried, but 15 Lost John's Cave breaks up the delivery of the medium with the addition of another recording. I guess that's the spoiler for, I will be talking about Lost John's Cave during my buried exploration But when will it come? Who knows? With Piecemeal, this episode, it changes the style of the prose in fun ways. Let's look at 3 episodes as an example. One anglerfish's statement starts like this. This all happened a couple of years ago, so I apologize if some of the details are a bit off. 7 the Piper, I'm choosing as the midpoint between the beginning and this episode, starts as, a lot of people call me lucky, you know. Not many come through the entirety of the war in one piece. Returning to 13 alone, Naomi starts her statement with, alright, I guess the beginning would be when I met Evan. Just with this small pool of examples, the beginning lines tend toward realism and neutral framing. I'm sorry if the details are a bit off. People call me lucky. I guess the beginning is when I met Evan. Conversational and slowly paced. This is how Piecemeal begins. Let's get one thing straight right off. This is not a goddamn confessional, right? There's an immediate picking up of pace with the use of an em dash to deliver the information and a shift in the diction right off and goddamn, an even more direct line towards a statement taker, alright? This is written in a distinctly different voice than all of the rest of the episodes prior. This strong and distinct narrative voice quickly sets it apart and makes it stand out among its peers. And this voice continues. The use of last names, abbreviations, frequent warnings to the audience. It's a great way to quickly build who Rentoul is so we know who we're dealing with. He knows the law and thus works above it or below it. A criminal. Is it above the law or below the law? Something like that. After his warning to not use this statement against him, Rentoul says that the Institute might help him, as his friend Hester had come to the Institute to give a statement and they resolved his issue for him. Rentoul needs them to resolve this issue as well, and he needs to tell me that it's just coincidence and my mind's playing tricks, and I need to not lose any more bits of me. He lays out the dirty laundry. He and Paul Noriega had been working together for 8 years. Well, one day they were roughing up Toby McMullen and Noriega got carried away. They got arrested for GBH, or grievous bodily harm, a few steps above assault, but somehow Noriega pinned it on Rentoul. He doesn't know how he did it. He went to jail for 5 years while Noriega walked free. Both of them are real pieces of work. This is why Rentoul wants revenge. After serving his time, Rentoul wanted to make Noriega suffer. When he tried confronting Noriega, the 5-year difference meant Noriega had hired some bodyguards, and Rentoul's parole kept him under control, so he was practically untouchable. Rentoul decides to do something out of the box. I like that's like a very subtle, I guess foreshadowing, tongue-in-cheek, out of the box, you know. He visits Toby McMullen, who's a drug addict. Small confession here, Rentoul mentions McMullen used to be a street punk, but after Noriega had grievously body harmed him, these days he was just a street punk who had trouble turning his neck. I thought that meant that nowadays he was slow to turn away from insults or events, so he was more nosy, but no, it's literally because his neck still hurts because of the trauma. Sorry, McMullen. Anyway, Rentoul learns from McMullen that before he and Noriega were arrested, Noriega had visited him in the hospital and had promised him all the drugs he would have wanted if he blamed it all on Rentoul. However, after the conviction, Noriega ignored McMullen and never gave him anything. Because of this, McMullen also wanted revenge on Noriega. There's not that many episodes that touch on the underbelly of London or other cities. 10 Vampire Killer looks at the homeless population with Trevor Herbert, and later 56 Children of the Night touches on drug addiction and organized crime. 49 The Butcher's Window has the Ukrainian mafia, but I won't elaborate on this episode too much here, and most any episodes with Salesa briefly toes the line of smuggling and seedy sites. I could say that this is an underutilized setting and world building, using the crime world. But I think Salesa, other avatars, and the cults already cover parts of it that's more fantastical. But yeah. McMullen wants to hit Noriega with magic, which Rentoul scoffs at, not believing in anything like that. McMullen mentions a girl, I'm assuming another street punk, or maybe a prostitute or something along those lines, who had a nasty ex-boyfriend. She'd turned to a woman named Angela to make him disappear, and he did. Rentoul is convinced enough to meet her. They go to her home in Bexley, a suburb of London, and he meets Angela, an old woman. The inside of her home is decorated like an old person's home, in stark contrast to the rough criminal shades of Rentoul and McMullen. Another detail noted, the walls were covered with framed portraits, the sort you'd get in any cheap antique store or charity shop, although as we went into the living room I noticed something that I didn't expect. They weren't paintings, they were jigsaw puzzles, each completed and framed. I wish there was more detail about what was contained in the portraits, but at least the word portrait itself suggests it's of a person. Maybe a detail about the shades of skin or their outfits or something else would have been nice. Throughout it all, Rantoul internally insults Angela and McMullen, delivering his intense anger at the situation and absurdity. However, Angela matter-of-factly asks if Rantoul wants Noriga dead, which he does. McMullen had filled her in, but Rantoul needed to provide her with something. He says he won't give her any money without reassurances that Noriga will suffer, and she only says that she doesn't want or need money and that she was well compensated already for the services that she provides. We'll return to this later. She needs something of Noriga's that was unwillingly taken from him. Before being arrested, Rantoul forgot to give a Zippo lighter back to Noriga, so he gave her that. Parallels, I guess, to John's lighter. Rantoul mentions that here he felt like Angela was dangerous. You've got to understand, I know dangerous. I understand dangerous. Hell, I am dangerous. This was something else. Either way, she says that Noriga will suffer and to just wait until she's finished, but doesn't elaborate on what she will be finishing. And Rantoul waits. And waits. And waits. But Noriga is still alive after 3 weeks, and Rantoul just can't stand to see him walking around like nothing. He was going to give it another week, but he caught wind that Noriga was going to meet with some fence named Salesa. I didn't know this, I had to look it up. Fence is slang for someone who trades in stolen goods. Very Salesa. They'll be meeting at the docks, and since Salesa was very paranoid and careful, Noriga wouldn't have his usual protection. To Rantoul, this is the perfect chance to catch him unawares, and when the time comes, he hides in a warehouse. Noriga and Salesa's deal is quick. Rantoul describes Salesa as a big Samoan guy with close-cropped hair who arrived with 4 bodyguards carrying wooden crates. Noriga turns up soon as well, with Rantoul noticing a limp, and an hour later Salesa and his goons leave with the crate. This is the first appearance of Michaele Salesa on the show and the first main appearance here on my series of videos. Even then, this is very brief. He always shows up around some strange artifacts and stuff like that, and even has a statement in 115 Taking Stock, where we get a little bit more insight into him, as well as another Flesh episode. Rantoul noted that Salesa looked disappointed as he left, and then he walks into the warehouse where Noriga is just sort of leaning against the wall, smoking. Hearing the door open, Noriga thinks that he's Salesa and tries to talk about reconsidering and lowering the price. It looks like Noriga had contacted Salesa in an attempt to stop what was happening to him. Rantoul says he enjoyed seeing Noriga's terror on his face, and maybe with a bit more time, he could have become an avatar. But he ignores Angela's directions and kills Noriga then and there. In his bloodlust, Rantoul noticed that Noriga's hands, which were up pleading to him, were missing some fingers. After the murder cooling down, he notices other missing body parts of Noriga. He had a glass eye which rolled out of his left eye socket when the body fell, as well as some of his teeth were missing. Most of these wounds seemed old, which doesn't align with his memory of 8 years with Noriga, but maybe those 5 away from him had an impact. Either way, he dismembers the body and hides it, making it so Noriga disappears and he can't be traced to the murder. He hides for some time until the heat loosens, and then he continues his criminal work as usual. 5 days after killing Noriga, Rantoul stumbles upon a cardboard box while walking near the reservoir on Tottenham Marshes. On the bridge, the box had written on it, "Lee Rantoul for immediate consideration," in all caps, wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a severed finger. Thinking he was being intimidated, Rantoul throws the finger into the reservoir and burns the box, heading home with his knife in his hand just in case he's attacked. Because of his paranoia, he trips on a hole and lands with his knife cutting into his pinky finger. He feels the pain of the severed limb, but the strange part is, trying to find something to stop the bleeding, he realizes that the wound has healed over, as if his finger had been removed years prior. I've heard that if you're fast enough, you can reattach severed fingers in the hospital, though I'm not sure how true that is. I'm not in medicine. Either way, I would think that that requires something to reattach to. But seeing the wound closed and healed adds a horrible finality to it. Your finger is gone and cannot be reattached. At home, Rentoul finds another box holding 2 toes. He tries ignoring it, but as he tries to adjust his flat screen TV, it falls and severs the matching digits. I mean, flat screen TVs are not that flat, I assume, compared to one's digits. So imagine the pain. I would think it'd be more crushing, but to cut and sever? It's almost like the falling TV was just a catalyst for the loss. Oh my god, is that a protocol reference? Catalyst? What? Rentoul says that this occurred 2 weeks ago.
Since then, I lost 4 more fingers to accidents, most of my toes. This eye I managed to put out on a goddamn fence post. I've lost count of the number of teeth gone, and believe me when I say that you don't want to know how I lost the hand. Each time, a box wrapped in brown paper. Lee Rentoul, for immediate consideration.
This is a great ramp up of stakes as we have a mental picture of the whole body when Rentoul starts his statement, even with his plead about losing bits of him. That's too vague at that point, so it's mostly ignored as he doesn't mention anything else about it. So he starts the statement, we have this mental picture of who he is, but then he starts listing out these body parts that he lost, and we begin to shift our internal image of him. He loses a finger, we see the loss. He loses the toes, we see the toes. The loss of the eye and the hand are big jumps in his physical change. Now his comment about losing bits of him comes back, and we wonder how much he's really lost. The idea that he's been without a hand since the beginning of the statement, that he's been without an eye, is scary. Once he tried outsmarting this curse. Having received a package of his big toe, Rentoul clears out his room, leaving it empty except for his mattress. But in the morning, his big toe is gone, as if it fell off all by itself. I'm partial that it's a rat that came into the night and bit it off, but who knows? He's not stupid. He quickly reasons that it's Angela's fault, that the curse that had made Noriga lose his own eye, fingers, teeth, and whatever had made him limp had been passed down to Rentoul. He goes to Angela, who just shrugs at him. She tells him some hungers are too strong to be denied. In his anger, he reached out to strangle her, but he couldn't. He doesn't know what happened, but he lost his hand then. He only knows he chewed it off, adding some great ambiguity along with his former comment to the statement taker that you don't want to know how I lost this hand. I'm inclined to believe that Angela did something to his hand in defense, but what? I'm not sure. Angela and her puzzle pieces, piecemeal, the portraits of jigsaws in puzzle frames. She mentioned she was well compensated for killing these people, not needing money for it. As we know in future episodes, avatars are powered and fueled by the entities that they feed. Angela is well compensated for making people suffer, having their body parts fall off as she completes a jigsaw of them. And by the looks of it, she's done this many times. To note, in 199 Seeing It Through, Martin brings up Angela, and John mentions she's still alive, in control of a nasty little flesh domain, which further confirms the status of this episode being the flesh, which was a question at some point. I think this is a very weird manifestation of the flesh because it doesn't so much focus on meat and flesh, but rather on the fear of losing control of your own body. Slowly having bits of you falling off with all the pains related to that, along with the healed and unrepairable space left behind. And all through puzzle pieces. His body is not his own. That's weird and terrifying. Rentoul finished his statement, pleading to the Institute for help. I don't have much time. I got a box this morning, a few hours before I came here. It was a tongue. John's comments on the statement are quick. There was a supplementary note that said Rentoul had become violent toward the staff and had had an accident that left him without his tongue. John mentions a tasteless joke about loose tongues, but I don't know what he's referring to. It might be a reference to loose lips sink ships, but it's not about tongues. It's definitely something to do with getting yourself in trouble by not controlling what you say, but I'm not fully sure what joke this is. If you know, let me know. Sasha confirmed that the criminal records mentioned in the statement were consistent, with Rentoul's last brush with the law being 2 months before the statement. Martin was also tasked with finding Angela. Not that I wanted him to get chopped up, of course, but someone had to. This is what Martin was referencing in 199. Martin searched for 3 days with nothing except pleasant chats about puzzles, which infuriated John. I will say this, John's hatred for Martin, in my opinion, early in the show, borders on absurd and forced, but at least it does get better. I'm not a fan of it that much. Tim, however, comes in clutch, tasked to find Rentoul himself. Rentoul seems to have disappeared early April of 2011. However, this statement was noted to be taken May 29th, 2011, a month of difference. This may be a mistake. Maybe the months should be switched. I'm not sure. January, March, April is when he disappears. May is when he takes a statement. I think they should be switched. But Tim was able to find Rentoul's last apartment left abandoned. The landlord had gone in to clear Rentoul's things after several months of unpaid bills, but found the apartment empty. This aligns with Rentoul having cleared his space of things that could hurt him. But then, all that remained in the house, he said, were hundreds and hundreds of small cardboard boxes. Of the first few episodes, this is one of the first times I remember having a strong, visceral reaction. It's an amazing use of ambiguity with so few clues. We have the body of work that is a statement that lays out these packages mysteriously appearing. We have Rentoul alone in an empty room with his big toe disappearing. We don't know how it did. We have Angela finishing up her puzzle fueled by his fear. It's almost like these boxes just spouted from nothing, a pile of them, each being an inch of flesh perfectly wrapped away. Imagine the pain he'd have suffered from that, piece by piece. It's using our own imagination against us, which, if you've seen this series before, I love when that happens. This line terrified me and was a great stab of horror ending off this episode. With a strong and new narrative voice, a glimpse into another world, a weird old lady, and a stellar ending, this early Flash episode is a great send-off for the rest of the show. I won't say that the rest of the episodes don't deliver, what with the Bone Turner coming soon after, but the vibes are not as well curated again. As we'll see, the Flash likes to be, well, fleshy. But that's not a bad thing, because what the Flash likes to do, it does very well. I just want more weird stuff,
Most of it was just unidentifiable chunks, but a lot of it was clearly animal. Chickens, lambs. I even saw a whole pig head. Some of it was human. I could see a man's torso near the top of the pile, and an arm jutted out near the base, the hand splayed out at the end. I had the weirdest impulse to wave to it.
Case number 0081912, a statement of Lucia Wright regarding just a hole filled with meat. Original statement given December 19th, 2008, released March 14th, 2019. Brief summary of this episode, Gertrude begins recording with Lucia Wright, who's stressed and tired, and encourages her to tell her story in the hope of feeling better. Lucia talks about being able to travel a lot because of her job, and she likes visiting churches because she liked the architecture. She isn't religious, but she can appreciate the aesthetic appeal of churches. She was on a trip in Istanbul when she went to visit a Gnostic temple, briefly describing what the Gnostics believed in, noting that the demiurge is the god of flesh. The temple is nearly empty and boring, but as she's leaving, a line of trucks pull up carrying piles of meat. She thinks it's dead bodies and hides, but soon sees them to be living. The grotesque bodies take piles of meat from trucks towards an entrance that she hadn't noticed before. Scared about what they're doing, Wright tries to stay hidden, but her position makes her cramp up, notifying one of the drivers. He beckons her over and hands her the other half of a goat, and she begins helping the group carry meat. Deep inside the temple, they have dug out a pit where they throw pieces of meat inside. At the very bottom is a huge mouth that grows with every morsel fed. Before it reaches the edge of the pit, explosives go off, burying everyone and Wright. She's trapped under rubble until Turkish emergency workers pull her out and return her back home. In the institute, Wright laments at not feeling better after telling her tale, and Gertrude refers her to a psychologist. In a different tape, Gertrude is glad Lucia didn't notice her as she was leaving the temple after planting the explosives she'd gotten from Decker. She successfully stopped this ritual for the flesh, but knows that other rituals won't be as easy to disrupt. John doesn't know what to make of this tape delivered to him by the web. He thinks that there's something to learn here that can be used to pull Daisy out of the coffin, and with Basira away, he's ready to go at it alone. This was an obvious choice for an episode to talk about, as it touches on some seemingly disparate episodes prior and concludes some of the story arcs related to the Flesh. Also a Gertrude episode, but not narrated by Gertrude herself. Lucia Wright is voiced by Beth Erie and delivers a stellar performance, but unfortunately, this episode is somewhat overshadowed metatextually. In the Magnus Protocol, which I've been referencing prior, which is the sequel show of the Magnus Archives, Beth Erie returns to voice the Archivist, a remnant of an eye monster whose conception and identity remain shrouded as of late February 2026, which is when I wrote this script. It's early March now, but whatever. As of this point, February, March 2026, don't have any answers for the Archivist. There are a lot of theories surrounding the Archivist, whether it's connected to John or not, and also why Beth Erie voices it. In more recent episodes, its voice has been a bit clearer, and I'm not sure if it's a signal of the Archivist growing in strength or of course correction by Rusty Quill in its sound design. It's maybe both. Either way, Erie's voice acting is clearer and more terrifying. Some have speculated that Lucia Wright is back, or her voice from this tape that John listens to is back, or even that it's just a coincidence. I do believe it's a coincidence that she's just a returning voice actress in a role that heavily modifies the character's voice because it's, well, a monster. In the Magnus Protocol Season 1 Q&A, Alex and Johnny addressed this explicitly. In terms of what were you looking for when you cast her, why did you cast Beth Erie? Broadly speaking, because Beth Erie rules. The problem is it's not just having worked with people before. It's hard to read this because it's literally a transcript of people just talking, and talking is hard. The problem is it's not just having worked with people before. There's a reason that you'll see some of the same people coming up, and that's by virtue of really good people to work with, very reliable, people that thoroughly recommend. It's odd that people feel the need of why we need to justify it. She's really good. She's a fantastic voice actor. In my opinion, Beth Erie in Protocol is there simply because she's good at what she does. Either way, Gertrude begins the tape, which Lucia briefly questions about using, but Gertrude just says that she's old-fashioned. Lucia asks if it will help stop her nightmares if she shares it, and Gertrude says that if she wanted that, she'd better speak to a therapist. However, she says many have found it cathartic to share, and Lucia agrees anyway. Lucia describes her former job as high pressure, which suggests that she either quit or was fired after this. She doesn't go into detail about what her job is. I'm thinking she quit. However, she made sure she had time for vacations, going to a city on a cheap flight and seeing the sights over a quick weekend. She liked visiting churches, and while being raised Church of England, she wasn't religious. Nowadays, she's mostly interested in the history, the politics, and the drama of religion. She also really liked churches, finding them meditative, and just by how their culture is, she tended to go to Catholic or Orthodox churches. Wright says that she got a deal for 5 days in Istanbul, which she was very excited about. I had heard a lot of lovely things about the city itself, but more importantly, I'd just been reading a brilliant series of articles on early schisms in the church, specifically the various Gnostic sects that started springing up around the 4th century, many located in what was then Constantinople and is now Istanbul. Requisite that they might be giants reference. She goes on to describe Gnosticism.
Do you know about Gnosticism? It's a sort of dualism that places the purity and goodness of the spiritual world in opposition to the baseness and corruption of the material world. Some Gnostic movements even go so far as to posit the existence of the demiurge. a counterpoint to the god of the spiritual world, who created material existence as a warped, imperfect imitation of its purity. Everything that is base, corrupt, and vile in the physical world comes from them. If God, as Gnostics see him, is the god of the soul, then the demiurge could easily be called the god of the flesh, of bone and blood, of meat.
To me, this discussion of the demiurge seems out of place, but learning that it's connected to meat helps settle it within the mythos. There's an implication here that a Gnostic temple was chosen as a staging ground for the flesh ritual because of its religious implications. Having the flesh ritual take place here would be a symbol of the spiritual world being taken over by the material world. Drawing this connection between a fear entity and a religious belief is not that common, but it has occurred before. In 12 First Aid, Diego Molina is heard chanting the name Asag, which is the name of a demon in Sumerian mythology associated with disease and corruption, which doesn't really seem to have much relevance to the statement of the 12 First Aid, except that it is also fabled that Asag was able to boil fish alive in the rivers. Further, in 43, section 31, Diego uses his position as an assistant curator at the Natural History Museum to steal a lightener connected to Asag, further enabling his connection to the desolation. He would worship Asag in place of the desolation. Both of these cases use a religion to bridge the gap of understanding, and I only wish there were something in past Flesh episodes that mentioned the demiurge maybe once or twice. I would have also enjoyed seeing this used for other entities as well. Maybe a god of death for the end, or a god of disease for the corruption. In 50 Deep End, in Magnus Protocol, various deities are listed in relation to the ocean and likely the vast. Either way, here the connection has been drawn and a religion for the flesh has been established. Summon the demiurge. Wright visits a Gnostic temple she saw advertised online, but when she arrived, it was lackluster and boring. She saw an old woman leaving, but the entire place was empty. She saw an old woman leaving, and then the entire place was empty. She doesn't even see any staff, which she was hoping would help her call a taxi to return to a hotel. She grows uneasy in the empty space, but isn't sure why, until she sees a truck approaching. She felt dread seeing it arrive and hid behind a pillar. She watches as 3 men come out of the truck and come around to a covered tarp that smelled damp, sour, and with a touch of iron. She sees a pile of flesh at the back, and she immediately thinks that they are victims of a massacre, that it's all humans. But then some of them started to move. Squirming limbs were dragging, rising, extracting themselves from this massive mound of flesh, and making their way down to join their companions on the ground one by one. Most of them could still be mistaken for humans at a distance. A few even wore clothes. No one said a word. I can recognize a style of writing here, of shading in some small parts but letting us fill in the details. But it's not as evocative as other moments have before. There was still a pile of meat in the truck, mostly of dead animals, and the men began to pick them up, taking it to an unmarked door. They disappear inside it, not returning. Wright spent a lot of time watching, but her legs began to cramp, making her cry out. The driver of the truck noticed her, and he called her forward. He was rail thin, dressed in rough overalls, with shaggy black hair and pale skin. He was East Asian, Chinese maybe, but he called me over in a crisp British accent. His tone was firm but unhurried, and to my ears not immediately threatening. We'll later learn that this is Tom Han, an avatar of the flesh that first appeared in 30 Killing Floor, where in 2013 he trapped David Leilau in a never-ending maze of a slaughterhouse. He used Leilau to drive a nail into his forehead with a nail gun, likely beginning his avatar ascension because he needed to die to become an avatar, and then disappearing. Later we get 72 Takeaway. In 2009, a Craig Goodall had snuck into a kebab shop that was closed after its owner, John Han, was arrested for killing, dismembering, and feeding his wife, Lan Ying, to his customers. Goodall encounters a Chinese man with a crisp English accent who chops his fingers off, but with help from a friend, he manages to escape and set Waltham Express Grill on fire. I'm assuming that Tom Han was living and hiding in this abandoned shop, collecting fingers for God knows what. Interestingly, when Goodall was trapped, Tom Han had rambled about the soul and flesh. He started talking again, asking if I knew that one of the reasons the Romans persecuted early Christians was because they believed them to be cannibals. Most people, he told me, assumed it was due to the Romans being confused over the nature of the blood and body of Christ that the early Christians were consuming, but that Octavius of Minucius Felix listed all sorts of grotesque accusations, including initiation rites that involved the murdering of an infant and drinking its blood. Tom had a stack of old Bibles and seemed to do some research, but Goodall never understood much of it, so the brainstorming stays unfocused. He would ramble about meat, blood, and souls, likely a precursor connection for the Gnostic demiurge. Like I said, I wish it was more explicit. Either way, back to the episode, Han makes Wright take a piece of the goat and to follow the line down into the temple. She's mostly afraid of what these men are doing and their grotesque baggage and appearances. When Han hands her some meat, he seems to know she's not one of them, but when she accepts the package, he moves on. Maybe this was a test that if Wright would have balked, he would have killed her and added her to the pile. Wright passes a tall, gangly woman whose arms bend backwards as she entered the temple. She descends down rough-hewn stone steps, leading further down than she expected, eventually reaching the pit. A hole was carved out, and the people were tossing meat into it. The pit was deep, and she couldn't see the bottom, but she could see the rising pillar of flesh. But then it moved, and I realized in a second what it actually was I was looking at. Not a pit, a mouth. She manages not to react and instead tossing the half goat in and turns back outside, hopefully done. But when she reaches the surface, she's just handed another chunk and made to return. As the truck empties, hopefully near the end of whatever they were making her do, more trucks arrive with more people and more meat. Wright begins to despair at the never-ending deliveries. She's at it for hours, but pushes to keep herself up. But I was spurred on by one thing. The woman with the backwards arm had fallen sometime in the night, and her companions had showed no hesitation. They had gripped her shoulders, hoisted her up, and hurled her straight into the gaping maw. I swore it wouldn't happen to me. She fears the meat, her body giving out and being given away. The woman with the backwards arms would probably be happy that her body was given to the mouth. All throughout this, the mouth got closer and closer to the edge of the pit. The pile of flesh within it grew larger and larger, sat there in an awful, half-solid slurry, chewed and crushed together. It was impossible to tell what had once been animals and what might have been us. It was all just meat. Great imagery describing the growing unease as the ritual continues. We try to conceptualize how much meat is needed to do all of this. And the smell grows along with the mouth. Smell is sometimes used in Magnus archives in subtle ways, not counting the myriad of times smell is used in corruption or hunt episodes. Corruption because the corruption smells and then the hunt smells its prey. Anyways, titularly, in 76, the smell of blood is connected to the incitement of the urge to commit unspeakable violence for the slaughter. The smell of burnt hair and flesh is frequent within Desolation episodes, the smell of ozone for the vast, the smell of brackish water for the dark. For the flesh, the smell of meat is frequently used, mentioned earlier in this episode, but also noted as rotten and earthy. It's, I'd like to say, natural scent that accumulates due to the amount of meat present. Have you ever smelled raw meat? Or a butcher's shop? Imagine it at this scale. To Wright, the smell is overwhelming, making the air thick, making the walls sweat a pinkish liquid. Disgusting! The pit of flesh grows, and Wright fears what will happen when it overflows. More workers are tossed in when they can't move any longer, adding to the pile. Their flesh is not their own. She thinks that she would have helped bring about whatever is going to happen, and then the bombs go off. Wright is at the bottom of the steps and tried running up as the ceiling above the pit collapsed, but she didn't get too far before being buried. She was trapped long enough for the meat to begin to rot, that smell rising back up. but eventually she's saved by Turkish rescue workers. At first she tells them to finish the job of ending the mouth, but that made them try looking for more survivors. Either way, the Turkish government paid for her return home, and she doesn't know anything else, finishing her statement. Gertrude asks if she feels better, which she doesn't, and then looks for a number to a therapist that can help, cutting off the recording. I just want to know who she's talking about, which therapist might know enough of the fears to help those affected by them. Melanie has a therapist, but she's not in the know. In the next tape, Gertrude is relieved that, while there may have been survivors, she was not noticed as she disrupted the ritual. Out of the 12 rituals that we learn about, web and corruption and extinction don't have rituals, and a stranger gets 2, I would rank the last feast at number 10. I'll touch the rituals for the respective fears that I'm talking about, so I'll share their ranks when I get to them. It's not that I don't like the last feast, it's just I find it kind of boring. Sure, a pile of meat that is a huge mouth eating meat. I guess that's fun imagery, but a bit predictable. I like the implications to Gnosticism and the demiurge, but it's never laid out, so the concept of the flesh pit is lost. I think it's fine, not as evocative as the unknowing, but at least better planned out than the scorched earth. It had some interesting vibes, I'll give you that. Gertrude mentions that Tom Han is still alive, but hopefully he'll just fade away. To date, we have no idea what happened to Tom and whether he's still alive or not. She also wants to keep an eye out for any esoteric fallout, like what happened to that Carlisle boy. This is in reference to 18, the man upstairs. In this episode, Krzysztof Rudenko encountered Toby Carlisle nailing meat to the walls. At the end of that episode, John had asked how Carlisle had gotten all that meat, and it's answered in this episode that it was remnants of the ritual. Gertrude also thanks Decker for helping her get the explosives, first noted in 113 breathing room, as having delivered them to her storage unit. The Gnostic temple was fully destroyed, but in the face of the ritual succeeding, this is an acceptable casualty, at least according to Gertrude. Plus, the temple wasn't even that popular anyways. She also affirms the thought that some rituals can be disrupted bombastically, likely thinking of the unknowing, but still have to think of more nuanced ways to end them, also likely thinking of the silence. Talking about rituals I've talked about before. One part of my lack of enjoyment for the last feast is the lack of buildup, or at least a lack of a sign of a buildup. I don't really need such a strong setup like what the unknowing gets, but something more would have been helpful. Gertrude says, I've had 10 years tracking supplicants drawn by the siren call of flesh, watching them gradually stockpiling meat. But no statements or final comments touch on this specifically in regard to a ritual. Gertrude tells herself to be more proactive in disrupting rituals before ending the recording. John tries to conceptualize why this tape was given to him, almost delivered by the web as it was left in his desk covered in cobwebs. During this time, John and Bashir are dealing with harrowing information. In 128 Heavy Goods, Breakin had delivered them the coffin and told them that Daisy was trapped in there, formerly thought to have died at the end of Season 3. In the episode prior, 129 Submerged, John tried to make sense of the Buried's dream logic. Seeing Kulbir Shakya escape the Buried with his grandfather's leather sheath in hand, he had realized that he needs an anchor to pull himself out of the coffin with Daisy, but needs a stronger anchor than a memory. He thinks of Gertrude's words, the siren call of the flesh, and thinks he's found a rather gruesome answer to his problem. An anchor created from his own body. Bashir has been gone for weeks now, running after leads given to her by Elias, but John needs to get Daisy out soon. And he'll do it by himself. Which leads us to the next episode.
God knows what would have happened if that little prick Sebastian hadn't given me that book. I didn't know what it was at first. Not really. But it talked to me about bones and flesh and muscle and blood, the bits of me I actually knew and liked. So I listened, and I read, and I learned.
Case number 0182003, statement of Jared Hopworth, the Bone Turner, regarding his association with flesh and recent activities, released March 21st, 2019. Brief summary of this episode: John tries to chop off his finger, but his avatarship means he can't do any lasting damage to himself. Melanie interrupts, asking what he's doing, and mentions it as another unsanctioned surgery, referencing John and Basira removing the slaughter bullet from her leg. John tries to look at it as an improvement, but Melanie says that it's only a change, that maybe it's better for him and Basira, but for her, it's just another horrible thing that happened to her. She says she kept the bullet because it told her her anger was justified. She wants to know why John wants to cut off his finger, and he says he needs an anchor to be able to save Daisy from the coffin. He needs someone like the Bone Turner to remove a rib, and Melanie takes him to the tunnels, where Helen the Distortion has a door. She had trapped Jared Hopworth in her corridors after the flesh attack on the Institute, and John plans for Jared to take a rib out of him in exchange for freedom. Inside the corridors, he encounters Jared Hopworth, who will remove 2 ribs, one for himself and one for John, in exchange for a statement and his escape. He talks about his childhood, dealing with unjust expectations from his parents, and then reading from the Bone Turner's tale. He started working odd jobs, mainly to make people disappear, when he began getting unmarked letters. They only have a name and a location, and when he follows their directions, he finds victims with good bones for him to take. Trusting the letters, he gets one that tells him to attack the Magnus Institute and kill John. He and some of his flesh friends squeezed through the pipes and started attacking people, but John wasn't anywhere to be found, and Melanie began stabbing them and doing lasting harm. He thinks it was a trap and wants to get out of these corridors. He takes out 2 of John's ribs, keeping one despite not liking how it feels. John collapses, ending the recording, and the tape recorder picks up again with him outside. Helen and Melanie converse about it, and he wakes up holding his rib. Helen tells him that she will help him when he needs to, and he prepares to save Daisy, needing a rest beforehand. Most of the episodes I've covered in past videos tended to cast a wide net, separated by seasons' worth of content. But these 2 flesh episodes come back to back, and encompass a lot of what I wanted to talk about, while also setting off the climax of a great plot arc in Season 4. As far as I can see, there isn't any other entity I plan to talk about that has had back-to-back episodes like this that are this good. This is also, I had a lot of trouble choosing which episode of The Bone Turner to talk about. But coming right off of 130, The Last Feast, I needed to talk about it. This episode has mentions of the buried, the spiral, and the slaughter, and with a sneaking feature of the eye. Coming right off of meat, John needs an anchor. He plans to dive into the coffin and save Daisy in hopes that the siren call of flesh will help him guide their way out. And he tries to cut off his finger. He feels the pain well enough, but it heals quickly, supernaturally. He's an avatar of the eye, and its power maintains him. Frustrated, he mentions how every other avatar can hurt him, but when he actually needs to be hurt, he can't. Melanie comes in, asking what he's doing. He's chopping off his finger, and he asks if she'll believe him that he's trying to save Daisy. She sarcastically asks if it's with some more bullshit surgery. Pertaining to this bullshit surgery, and also the most recent time John was carved up in 125 civilian casualties, after a slaughter statement, John learns that Melanie's bullet is pumping violence into her. Going back a few episodes, in 117 Testament, Melanie quickly recounts her research in India, encountering a huge angry mass of dead flesh and guns. She fled from it, but got a bullet in her thigh for her troubles, which didn't show up in any scans. Since there was no physical wound, it hasn't been treated, but it's been getting infected, increasing her violence. In 125, John and Basira do impromptu surgery on a grave on Melanie's leg, removing the bullet. She wakes and attacks John, stabbing him with a scalpel. This was his most recent huge wound. In this episode, John tries to apologize, saying he was just trying to save her life. And she angrily thanks him, but says that she can't stop seeing his face when she wakes up. She and John have an argument that, for me, after the first few listens, didn't really seem to go anywhere, and it was hard to understand, but I think I got it now. John keeps trying to see the positive, the silver lining. He's looking at this like there's a right and wrong, trying to put it into a neat box. But Melanie isn't having it. When dealing with the horrors, there isn't a right and wrong, there's just different. If they would have asked her, she would have said no. So the only course of action was to betray her trust and destroy her sense of safety. They saved her life, but there was a giant cost. John tries to say that she is better, but she again refuses this, saying that that's based on Basira. Basira deals in intel these days, in usable data, assets, not feelings, not people, crying, shaking, nightmares. That is better. It doesn't feel like it, but as far as Basira sees it, I'm not compromised anymore, and that is better. Basira and Melanie, in the wake of the unknowing, have to pick up the pieces in the Institute. Without John in a coma, Daisy presumed dead in the coffin, Martin isolated with Peter Lucas, or Tim actually dead. Basira had to become stronger, more pragmatic, echoing Gertrude's single-minded focus. With the bullet inside her, Melanie had her anger to hold on to. She tells John that she chose to keep the bullet in, even though it was evil, because it told her that the anger she's had has been justified. Removing the bullet now may have uncompromised her in Basira's eyes, may have saved her life in John's eyes, but to Melanie's eyes, removing the bullet removed the support of her anger that made all the pain worth it. Now she's left empty. She repeatedly tells John to stop trying to make it all worth it in the end because, to her, it will never be worth it. Moving on from the argument, Melanie asks again about his finger, and John tells her about his plan. She half-jokingly offers to chop it off for him, but he says it's a bad idea. He tries to use the knowledge that he's gained over 130 episodes, saying that through all the statements, he hasn't found anything that can help. He's synthesized this information that he's researched and discovered in the last 2 episodes, and the only solution he sees is using the bone turner to pull a rib out. And Melanie gets an idea. She takes him to the tunnels, where Helen the Distortion has a door. John refuses to talk to her, but Melanie knocks, saying that she's been helping them. He argues that it has never helped anyone without a cost, and the door opens to Helen, telling him that if she's an it, what is he? How's the term? I know I am, what are you? Right? The last time they interacted, 1:15 taking stock, Helen interrupts John to talk, wanting to make sense of having just killed somebody. She felt nourished, but didn't like how it felt, and Helen Richardson had liked talking to John, so she hoped that talking with him could help her. Helen hoped that they could work through their changes together, but instead he pushes her away, not trusting her. In this episode, Helen is feeling much better, chipper than she was, and is able to meet John bar for bar when he argues with her. He again tries to make things into right and wrong, and like Melanie had pushed against that, so does Helen. Name, categories, it's also important to you, isn't it? You do know that none of it is actually real. It's just meaningless boxes. Melanie asks if he's still in there, and Helen says that he is, that she can't digest him like normal humans. She could be persuaded to let him out, as he's an irritant. Melanie tells John that Helen helped clean up after the flesh attacked. In 123 web development, Basira told John that the Institute was attacked by the flesh, but never mentioned Jared Hopworth by name. Helen whisked away the dead bodies and trapped the bone turner in her corridors. Basira told Melanie to not tell John. They couldn't kill him. Melanie stabbed 3 hearts, and he didn't go down. So, he's still alive in there, angry, and probably hungry. Helen says that she'll let him out after getting what they need, and John enters the corridors. The usual echo of the hallways can be heard, and the door closes behind him. After a very short time of walking, John gets lost and confused. But before he can worry about that, Jared Hopworth appears. He's voiced by Alexander J. Newell, who also voices Martin. In the Season 4 Q&A Part 1, Johnny and Alex beat around the bush as to why he had to voice Jared, alluding to getting different voice actors, but either schedules didn't line up and they couldn't show up, or they kept showing up late, or they had the voice actors take on different, better-suited roles. Eventually, they just ended up using Alex and a bunch of vocal changes that got harder as they were in the corridors. A portion of the fan base has been vocal about how difficult the audio sounds for Jared, and while I agree it's not the best, it's definitely not the worst. Either way, first time hearing it, yes, it is difficult, but I would have never guessed that it was Alexander J. Newell. Never. You really have to concentrate to be able to understand what he's saying, and I and other people tend to not concentrate so much, so when Jared is speaking, you do have to pull your attention towards, oh, he's saying words. Jared speaks with John, joking that Jared Hopworth is what it says on his license, but the picture is a bit out of date. The transcript I use are really funny. Transcribers note Jared's speech is accompanied by continuous sounds of wet, mobile meat and the occasional bony snap or click. Too much for me to record individually. Just try to imagine that as you're reading, if you care to, that is. Really succinct, really true to how it actually sounds.
Jared Hopworth?
That's what it says on my license. Mind you, the picture's a bit out of date.
Yes.
I tried to kill you, and you throw me in here. And now what? You just walk in.
I didn't. That wasn't me.
Your people. Your gaff.
Jared comments on the absurdity of it all, about trying to kill John, getting trapped in the corridors, and then John just waltzing in like nothing. John says it wasn't him, but he's part of the people who did trap him, so it's all the same to him. Jared says he wanted to kill John specifically, and he still does, but John barters quickly, saying he could help him get out if Jared helps him. He agrees readily enough, saying most of his jobs are either to put something in or take something out of the body, and John tells him that he wants a rib removed. Before he can, though, John tries to get a guarantee he won't just kill him then and there, and Jared says that he wants to get out more than he wants to kill him. Still, John pushes his luck, asking why he attacked the Institute in the first place, compelling him to tell. If John wants a statement, that'll cost him another rib, and John agrees. And Jared begins the statement. He had a growth spurt when he turned 9, which made all the other kids afraid of his size. But they were scared, and that felt good, even back then. It felt right. My dad was proud of it too. He was a sharp man and bully, and watching me loom over people really made him happy. Mom just scowled, but then, she always did. He was a bully, and he drifted through his years, not seeing a future for himself. He doesn't know what would have happened if Sebastian Adekoya hadn't found him the book. As we know, Jared's first appearance was in 17 The Bone Turner's Tale, where Sebastian Adekoya finds the Lightner of the same name, titular bitular, and the Bone Turner's Tale enthralls Jared, turning him into this monster. In his statement, Jared says that he stumbled through what the book taught him, with his parents being his first test subjects. Turns out Dad didn't like being tall nearly as much as he thought he would, and Mom didn't like her new smile either. Great! Hedging around the bush, shading in small pieces, letting us imagine what the fuck he means by that. What do you mean her new smile? Where? He mentions working different jobs, mainly the ones that he got because he could get rid of people easily. This is in reference to 49 The Butcher's Window and his stint with the Ukrainian mafia, as I mentioned before, where P.I. Gregory Pryor witnessed him disposing of Hector Laredo's various body parts inside a small flesh pit. It's somewhat similar to The Last Feast, actually. He discarded pieces that he didn't want and kept things for himself. Jared says he left many people afraid, and that the Institute must have gotten their statements at some point. Another appearance of Jared is in 90 Bodybuilder. Here, Ross Davenport witnessed Marie Baldwin be enticed to become a flesh avatar by Jared. His gym catered to his kind. Marie is mentioned as a person of interest regarding animal mutations on a farm, where sheep were found dead with their femurs removed. Another question of what they wanted to do with these femurs, and maybe it was to add to the collection of flesh for the ritual, but there are no concrete answers for this. Marie doesn't come back. Those femurs don't come back. Jared continues, saying he was approached by other flesh avatars who tried to talk to him about gods and remaking their world, trying to recruit him for the last feast. He told them he wasn't interested, in much kinder words, and liked the world as it is, though some of his friends from the gym joined the flesh agents. He really didn't care. The wording here is interesting, mainly coincidental, and not a bad thing. He says, I like the world just as it was, which echoes how in 134, Time of Revelation, Peter Lucas believes that the web hasn't attempted a ritual because it actually prefers the world as is, playing everyone against each other, and so on. Both Peter's reasoning and Jared's lack of ambition run parallel to each other, a more pragmatic point of view. Jared is more interested in his own pursuits than trying to summon the flesh to the world. He says 2 years ago he started getting letters with only names, dates, and locations in them. He ignored them at first, not knowing who they came from, but they kept finding him wherever he was. Eventually, he allowed his curiosity to take over and follows one letter led him to Reagan Hasnan of 70 Claremont Gardens. He tells John that his affiliation with flesh means he can tell when bones are good or not, and he says Reagan had good bones. They were solid, healthy, and they jumped at my touch. I have no idea what this means, but obviously Regan isn't able to tell us. Great use of ambiguity here. He trusts the letters to lead him to good quality bones. They also sometimes led him to someone like him, or just a victim to scare. He gets a letter to attack the Institute, even a picture of John, and is told to kill him. He never questioned it, conditioned as he was to expect good things from these letters. Eventually, in 160, The Eye Opens, we'll learn that the letters were sent by Elias all along. He was conditioning Jared to trust the letters, using his powers to find good bones, good victims, and good allies for Jared. He sent the letter to kill John, but Jared misrepresented the timing and attacked too early, well away from John. He was hoping Jared would attack John, marking him for the flesh, and John would survive. He was banking on John surviving the attack, and he had no intention for Jared to survive. And then things went awry. Jared and some of his mates squeezed through the Institute's pipes, and he remembers with fondness the look of fear on people's faces. He called Martin the weak one who fled. He thought that the skinny one, Melanie, also fled, and that all was left was Basira, whom he calls the Copper. They tried to run, but we were everywhere, and they couldn't stop us undoing them for parts. They being a vague collective, I assume members of the Institute's staff, and there's an implication here that some people were killed by the agents of the flesh, but no one ever mentions any casualties beyond the agents themselves. I think this is enough to say that there was at least one casualty in the attacks, an amendment to my kill count videos. Of note, back to 134 Time of Revelation, Peter reminds Martin of their deal, which seems to have been made because of this attack. In exchange for protecting his friends, Martin agreed he'd work for Peter. Go watch my extinction video if you so desire. Since then, any silent attack on the Institute may have been stopped by Peter. Schrodinger's attack on the Institute will never get a definite answer as to if there were more attacks or not. He took care of them, if there were any! Jared was having a great time attacking the Institute until the skinny one came back, this time with a knife. He emphasizes that the knife hurt and that Melanie was able to kill other flesh mates, Jared saying she ruined their perfect bodies. Melanie was able to do this as she was powered by the slaughter here. She was unable to kill Jared, but it left him scared enough to run and be trapped by Helen. In a very dream logic way, we've seen how, in the place of any sort of trickery, a monster or avatar can disrupt or hurt a different monster or avatar. A slaughter-powered attack could hurt a flash-powered body. In 46 Literary Heights, Mike Crew used a vast-powered lightner, Exaltiora, to trap a spiral-powered monster, the Lichtenberg figure. In 56 Children of the Night, Hunt-powered Trevor Herbert could resist and kill a web-powered spider-woman person thing. In 59 Recluse, a Desolation-powered kiss from Agnes Montague freed Ronald Sinclair from his web-powered compulsion at the hands of Raymond Fielding. Even further, other avatars have been used to disrupt other entities' rituals. I've mentioned these prior, I really like mentioning these. It doesn't hurt to say, in 53 Crusader, an eye-powered sanctum was destroyed by dark-powered assailants. In 116 The Show Must Go On, a slaughter-powered soldier kills a stranger-powered mechanical Turk. In 145 Infectious Doubts, Gertrude used the web to disrupt the Desolation's ritual. It's just really cool seeing these warring pieces of eldritch horrors taking on one another again and again. Returning to Jared, he wonders if the letters were a trap. Yes, they were. Maybe they wanted to get him into these corridors, but for whatever reason is beyond him. He finishes, and John critiques the small statement, which, yes, is a bit bare bones, pun intended, but it's still rife with horror and implications. The statement wraps up Jared's storyline very well. Jared will appear once more in 171 The Gardener as he's taken to the London incursion well, cultivating a garden of body horror, using his victims' body dysmorphia and impossible expectations against this. This episode's not so much important for Jared as a character, but it does end him, because after detailing the horrors of the mortal garden, Jared would let himself be killed by John. But for now, Jared digs his fingers into John's body. He pulls out 2 ribs, one of which he keeps for himself, which he says feels weird, and he doesn't think he likes it. Still, he assimilates it into himself. The Bone Turner's malleable body has been showcased a lot in past episodes, and here it's emphasized how greedy he is. He could reject the bone. He doesn't need it, but he keeps it anyways. His bones are not his own. Furthermore, this moment, him digging into John, is deceptively important. As I mentioned prior, we'll learn that Elias sent Jared on John's trail in the hope to mark him for the flesh. This doesn't go according to plan, and Elias probably started figuring out how else to do it. The coffin returned to the Institute on its own, but other forces moved things around. John was gifted the tape recorder for the last feast by the web, another indication that Annabelle Cain and other web avatars are nudging Elias's plans into fruition. The web allowed for John to think about using an anchor, and with Daisy in the buried, he willingly let Jared mark him for the flesh anyway. Even if Elias had initially failed, he was still able to succeed in his plan. 2 birds with 1 stone, I'd say, with the combo of the mark for the buried. But that's for a different episode. Removing his ribs hurt John, a different sensation than he was expecting, and he's left weak. While Jared turns away, free to leave, John passes out, cutting off the tape recording. It comes back on in the tunnels, with Melanie and Helen looking over him. They see him holding a bone, and Helen comments that bodies are weird, and is glad not to have to deal with them anymore. Melanie says that must be nice, and Helen wholeheartedly agrees. Their connection will be elaborated further on at a different time, but for now, it's a funny moment after the intensity of Jared Hopworth. Melanie asks if Jared's free, and Helen says she may have led him to a door that opened over a river, one last insult. John wakes up thanking Helen for her help. From here on out, for a time at least, Helen will be John's ally in dealing with the horrors. Melanie warns John that Basira won't be happy with this development, but he counters that Basira isn't here to stop him. True enough. Final comments. These 3 episodes I like for different reasons. 14 Piecemeal is a really cool first look into Flash themes, a great narrative voice, and horrifying implications. 130 Meat details the ritual of the flesh, the last feast, while tying up nascent flesh threads with Tom Han. 131 gives a good conclusion for the Bone Turner's tale, marking John for the flesh, and setting up for John to enter the coffin to save Daisy in the next episode. A very well written arc within season 4. I would rank the episodes from best to least best, 14, 130, 131. Chronological. Overall, I find that The Flesh is very active in its depictions, frequently peppering the show with its meaty appearances. Meteor? It stays within statements and in brief surrounding moments, usually as background world building, but its evocative writing helps it stand out. Then, as season 4 kicks off the coffin story arc, The Flesh becomes plot important within these last 2 episodes. They use the legwork of all the episodes prior to really punch out how horrifying, disgusting, and interesting this entity is. The Bone Turner is a strong focus used within the show, having a statement about him in every season, making sure we don't forget him. Besides Jared, just using meat, cannibalism, which wasn't an aspect I wasn't really able to talk much about besides like John Han and his wife. there are mentions of cannibalism in regards to the flesh. And then bones are easily noticed motifs that are used frequently in the show. At times, I'd say it becomes a crutch, as the interesting themes of Piecemeal become overshadowed by the meat being nailed to the wall. It's not all that. It's a big aspect, though. Like I said regarding the ritual, I would have liked more intent behind manifestations. It doesn't need to allude to the last feast, but at least dealing with themes of ownership and bodily autonomy would have been interesting. Most of the time, it's just meat. Tom Hand could have had a good lead into discussions of the soul and the body, the demiurge, but Jared Hopworth was a more attractive avatar, and he was not the philosophical type. And yeah, Jared's appearances were more fun than Tom's. For what it is, The Flesh is a really fun dread power, and I enjoy most of its episodes. I also dislike some of them as well, a wide range of quality. I feel like cannibalism could have been pushed forward a bit more, maybe turning the meat dial down by a notch or two. Most of the episodes are very efficient, attaching to one storyline or the other, and there's a handful of isolated episodes with varied quality. As a whole, the flesh is used in the show in great ways, and it really shows how terrifying it can be. The flesh proves that your body is not your own. Of the other episodes of The Flesh, 178, The Processing Line, a rare episode I enjoy from Season 5, with an intense, slow pace that really delivers the dread of a loss of bodily autonomy. It also sets up the end of Daisy's storyline in the next episode. 49, The Butcher's Window, Jared's second appearance, has great tension and visuals. 17, The Bone Turner's Tale, depicts the titular Leitner very well. I just think that Sebastian's surrounding story is just fine. 171, The Gardener, has some sickening imagery, but the diction tends to distract and bogs down what's being told. Really good sound effects, though. 5, Thrown Away, I'm counting as flesh, even though some of it can be attributed to either stranger, desolation, and mainly extinction, but I wanted to include it anyways for its interesting use of repeated patterns for horror. 58, Trail Rations, I've come to appreciate a bit more through its imagery, but as it stands, it uses too much implications regarding Eustace Wick that it distracts from the horror. I do like the unnamed protagonist and her dilemma, which allows for fun speculation. 72 Takeaway has great comedic bits, and like I mentioned, has Tom Hand giving a peek into his thoughts and beliefs, but it's not enough. Too much is kept vague here. 30 Killing Floor, Tom's first appearance, is fine. It's kind of boring, but we do see Tom's apotheosis into Flesh Avatar. I just thought it was slaughter when I first listened to it, because it kept talking about killing things, but it's, the fear of the slaughterhouse flesh, blah, 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 whatever. 115, Taking Stock, was somewhat boring to me, with the horror being, oh no, the meat grinder was actually making the cook a new arm while he mundanely cut up his own arm for food. Oh no. I don't think the meat grinder is an interesting story. Sorry, Salisa. I guess there was cannibalism there. I just didn't like the episode that much. 90 Bodybuilder, Jared's second appearance, was too slow-paced and did not have a good payoff within the episode or outside it, beyond showing that Jared had friends. Good for him. 18, The Man Upstairs, I don't like. It's more disgusting than scary, and it doesn't do anything for the overall story beyond having meat be meat. Wow. 103, Cruelty Free, I do not like. I hate the flesh pig. This is so stupid. Obviously, these are mine own opinions, so I would love to hear from you what you think about the flesh. Let me know what you like about the flesh, which episodes are your favorite, or what scares you about the flesh. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and share with your friends. I'd love to hear some feedback about my videos and my channel. Don't forget to be passionate, and I'll see you later.